He always believed that silence was the only thing that could truly heal him. His name was Mark Harper, and he was running from a past so loud it had deafened his soul. So when he stumbled upon an abandoned apple orchard on the edge of a forgotten rural town, he bought it without a second thought. The price was suspiciously low, almost a giveaway, and the seller was tight-lipped, refusing to speak a word about the previous owner. But Mark didn't care. All he wanted was peace, the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones. He imagined quiet mornings, the scent of apple blossoms, and long, silent afternoons. His first night in the old farmhouse should have been calm, a welcome respite from the chaos he'd left behind. But it wasn't. As dusk settled and the sky turned a deep, bruised purple, Mark stood at his bedroom window, looking out over his new property. And that's when he noticed something impossible. The entire orchard, hundreds of gnarled, ancient apple trees seemed to be leaning toward the house. There was no wind. Not even a faint breeze stirred the leaves. Yet the branches shifted, inching closer with a subtle, unified movement, like a vast crowd trying to eavesdrop through the walls. Mark tried to laugh it off. It had to be a trick of the light, an illusion caused by exhaustion from the move. He was just tired, he told himself, seeing things that weren't there. He went to bed, pulling the covers up to his chin, determined to find the peace he'd paid for. But around midnight, the sounds began. Faint whispers carried on the still night air. At first, they were gentle, almost indistinguishable from the rustle of leaves or the settling of the old house. They were like soft breaths sliding through the foliage. But as the minutes ticked by, the whispers grew sharper, more distinct. They weren't just sounds anymore. They trembled with an emotion he couldn't quite place, something that felt like a desperate, quiet fear. He lay awake for hours, listening, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. The second night, his unease turned into a cold, creeping dread. The trees were undeniably closer. He could see it clearly from the porch. The first row, which had been a good 50 yards from the house, was now barely 30. Their dark, twisted shapes loomed larger in the moonlight, their branches like skeletal arms reaching for him. He told himself he was being paranoid, that his mind was playing tricks on him again. Grabbing a heavy-duty flashlight, he stepped outside, the screen door slamming shut behind him with a sound that felt unnervingly final. He needed to prove to himself that this was all in his head. The moment the powerful beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness and hit the orchard, he froze. His breath hitched in his throat. Every single tree in the front row was tilted toward him in perfect, unnatural alignment. Their branches were stretched low, dipping almost to the ground, as if they were bowing in unison. A grotesque, silent welcome. And then he saw them. His blood ran cold. Faces. Small, pale faces were half merged into the rough bark of the trunks. Their eyes were wide, darting left and right with a frantic, terrified energy, like animals trapped inside the wood. Their mouths were frozen open in silent screams, as though they had tried to cry out for help just before the trees swallowed them whole. Men, women, even what looked like children, their features were contorted in eternal agony, their identities lost to the grain of the wood. Mark stumbled backward, a strangled cry escaping his lips. The orchard reacted instantly. A low, groaning creak echoed through the night as the trees lurched forward. Roots, thick as pythons, dragged through the soil, pulling the massive trunks along like slow, deliberate feet. The sound was sickening, a wet, tearing noise of earth being displaced. He scrambled back into the house, heart hammering against his chest, and slammed the door, fumbling with the deadbolt. He ran through the small farmhouse, locking every window, checking every door, his mind reeling from the horror he had just witnessed. But the locks offered little comfort. The whispers followed him inside. They seeped through the walls, through the floorboards. But now they weren't just fearful. They were pleading. Words formed in the rustling static. "Help us, please. Set us free." The voices were a chorus of trapped souls begging for release from their wooden prison. The third night broke him. He had huddled in the living room, armed with a fireplace poker, refusing to sleep. But exhaustion eventually claimed him, and he drifted into a nightmarish doze on the sofa. He woke with a jolt to a sound that would haunt him forever, a sharp, percussive cracking, like bones snapping under immense pressure. He looked up, and his world tilted. The orchard had advanced all the way to his porch. The house was completely surrounded. Twisted branches rattled softly against the window panes, tapping, tapping, like skeletal fingers demanding to be let in. He could feel a deep vibration under his feet. The floorboards were bowing upward, lifting 1 inch at a time as immense roots bulged and strained beneath the foundation of the house. Panic seized him. He had to get out. He grabbed his car keys from the hook by the door and lunged for the exit. But the front door wouldn't budge. It was jammed solid. Not from rust or age. It was pressure. Something was pushing against the entire house from every direction, squeezing it like a vice. The walls groaned, glass creaked in its frame. He threw his shoulder against the door again and again, but it was like trying to move a mountain. Desperate, he ran to the kitchen window, forced the latch, and managed to shove it open. He scrambled out, dropping to the damp ground below, freedom for a single, fleeting second. He thought he had made it, but the moment his feet hit the dirt, a thick, woody root shot out from the ground and wrapped around his ankle with impossible speed and strength. It tightened, dragging him back toward the orchard. He clawed at the soil, his fingers digging into the cold earth, screaming for a help he knew would never come. More roots erupted from the ground around him, a writhing net of living wood. They coiled around his legs, his wrists, his chest, binding him completely. He was helpless, pinned to the ground as the trees leaned low over him. The trunk of the nearest tree began to split open vertically, not with the sound of cracking wood, but with a wet, fleshy tearing. It opened like a grotesque wooden jaw, revealing a dark, hollow interior. The last thing Mark saw was the face of a man deep inside that trunk, his eyes wide, trapped, and eternally screaming in silence. A new face joining the gallery of the damned. Then the bark closed around him, silencing his own screams as darkness consumed him. By dawn, the orchard stood perfectly still again. The trees were back in their neat rows, silent and peaceful under the morning sun. The farmhouse stood empty, but the orchard felt fuller. The locals in the nearby town still avoid the place. They trade whispers about the old apple orchard on the hill, warning newcomers to stay away. They say the orchard is alive, and it is always, always hungry. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next descent into the dark.